And so it's this highly concentrated economic pressure. Economic pressure on the apartheid state that they can't ignore and go on as business as usual. And this isn't a coincidence, this is cause and effect, right? This is the strategy of divestment leading to the end of apartheid. And so when we're thinking about our strategy, when we're thinking about what's next, knowing that we want the end of the apartheid state of Israel, we should be thinking about divestment. So we answered question number one, what's the strategy? Divestment. How do we enact that strategy? Let me pause for a second. A lot of us are boycotting, right, through the BDS movement. Boycotting consumer products is something that you can do as an individual, right? You just choose not to buy something. Divestment requires something different. And so in order to understand that, we're going to do a little bit of econ 101. It will be very easy, I promise. I know econ is like intimidating for folks. When I was in college, I had friends literally at school doing vocab, and they were like, econ is the hardest class I'm taking. So it won't be that bad. For those of us in the West, and really most of the world, thanks to imperialism and Western intervention, we live under an economic system of capitalism. And so how does capitalism work? Capitalism creates the divide of society into these two groups. So you have the ruling class and you have the workers. I like to think of the ruling class as the owners because that's really a big part of what they do. So they own corporations, they own factories, they own politicians through lobbying, they own the media, the way that Jeff Bezos can just like buy the Washington Post. And then on the other side, you have the workers. So that's people like me and you, people who have to work to make a living. We use our labor, our time, our effort, our physical work, our mental abilities to actually create the things that have value that the owning class then makes money off of. And even if you're not working right now, you're still a worker. We're all creating value in different ways, and so if you're a student, as mothers, as caregivers, as homemakers, these are all identities that you can have, and you're still part of the working class. So the problem with this system is that we generate way more money for them than the money that they pay us for our work. And that's how they get rich, right? Capitalism requires this form of exploitation, and the ruling class benefits from it while ordinary people suffer. And let me show you what I mean by that. So this is company revenue per employee in a given year. And on this side, we have tech companies. So at NVIDIA, a single employee generates almost $4.5 million per year for the company. Does anyone here work at NVIDIA? Okay, because they're all making $4 million. They're not, right? Like we know people who work in tech. You have good salaries, but what you're generating for your employer is way more than what they're ever going to pay you. And this isn't just limited to tech. On this side, we have fast food companies, revenue per employee. At a McDonald's or a Starbucks, an employee is generating almost $200,000 per year for their company. And they're getting paid minimum wage for this. Another way that you can look at this that's really telling is if you look at the CEO to median worker pay. The ratio for Starbucks, I don't know if anyone knows this or like has a guess that they want to make. It's like 10 to 1, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1. Does anyone want to guess? 200 to 1. It's 6,666 to 1. Yeah. And so, like, we're boycotting these companies because they're on the BDS list, but like, even if they get taken off the BDS list, we should be boycotting them, right? Like, this is absurd. builds their wealth, and it's how they maintain power. And so when we talk about divestment, we're either demanding that these companies divest from contracts they have with Israel, or we're pressuring investors to pull funding away from companies that are complicit with Israel. This is the reason why moral arguments don't work. We're trying to make appeals to the people in the ruling class, whose interests are totally different from ours. And I know a lot of us in this room are tech workers, we're making those six-figure salaries, we've probably never worked fast food in our lives, but you have way more in common with the Starbucks McDonald's worker than you do with the CEO at your own company. And that's because that CEO has already made their ethical compromise by participating and benefiting from a system like this. And so we don't go to them with moral appeals because we don't accept the system as it is. And that can be scary, right? It can feel like this. What are we supposed to do with a little fish versus a big shark? But we can fight back if we come together as workers. All of us who run the world through our labor, across companies, across industries, across education level, race, class, we come together. And I hope this idea feels familiar to you all, because this is how we think about the Ummah, right? We come together across race, class, nationality, whatever barrier society creates, and we work together for the betterment of our brothers and sisters. You might notice that these, no one of you believes until you love for one another what you love for yourself. I want us to really sit with that for a minute. Like, what does it really mean to love for another what you love for yourself? The Prophet, peace be upon him, he doesn't say, want for people that they have their basic needs. He says, want for them what you love for yourself. And so, like, yes, I need food to survive. But, like, I love coming home at the end of the day and having a warm, healthy meal with my loved ones. I love going out to brunch with my friends. I love splurging and going out on a random weekday to get boba. Those are things that bring me joy, right? They make me happy. It's part of who I am. I love that for myself. And so I have to want that. Is this still working? Is this okay? Okay. I can hold that. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. If I love that for myself, I have to want that for my brother and sister. And yet, we live in a world where people's basic needs are not even being met. And it's not because we don't have the resources to do so. In California alone, we have 250 billionaires. Collectively, they own $2 trillion of wealth. And I want you to go home and like I can't even conceptualize that amount of money, right? Like, look up the difference between $1 million and $1 billion and $1 trillion. $2 trillion of wealth that you generated through your labor, and yet you have no control over it. And so when I think about this hadith, in order to actually fulfill that obligation of being a true believer, to me it means that we have to challenge the system that allows any of this to happen. And it's the same system that has enabled, facilitated, and profited off of the genocide. And so when we come together as workers, as the working class, not only do we challenge the status quo, we're also fulfilling our obligation as believers. So, how do we actually come together like this in a strategic way so we can actually make an impact? We organize. Does anyone here know what this term means? Have any ideas? Something you want to share? Like, what does it mean to organize? Yeah.
Unionizing a workplace.
Okay, unionizing a workplace. What else? Yeah. Planning. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, very simply, at its most basic form, it's regular people who share a common problem coming together to pursue a common goal in order to make things better. I'll share a quick example of this. So I'm part of a group called the Tech Workers Coalition, where a group of tech workers who are organizing basically to try to make the industry more ethical. A big focus of the group has been around Palestine. The Bay Area chapter really grew after 2023. And so a topic that comes up a lot is like surveillance in Palestine, surveillance technology. And we started to realize that we're seeing the surveillance technology in our own communities. So there's a startup called Flock Safety, you might have heard of it. They've been installing cameras in cities around the Bay Area, around the country. These cameras can very easily be misused by police, by Flock employees. They can and have been accessed by ICE in the Bay Area. This is not something we want in our community. And so a group of us started to meet. Every other week we had a standing meeting and we just tried to see, like, what can we do? We had no plan of where this thing was gonna go. It was just, let's figure out what we can. And so we started out, one person's like, I'll read through the Flock website and see what they have. Someone else says, I'll look at other cities that have Flock and see what they did. We come together a few weeks later, okay, what else do we want to know? Who else should we talk to? And over time, we learned that there was actually a city council resolution that was coming up for a vote about whether they wanted to renew the contract with Flock or not. And so all of a sudden, we have this very clear goal, right? If we can convince city council to not renew the contract, we take down the cameras. And so all of a sudden, this becomes like a city council organizing campaign that I've never done this before. Most of the people in our group have never done this before. We don't know what we're doing. And that's okay, right? Just because you haven't done it before doesn't mean that you can't do it. And I think that's one of the really cool things about organizing. You know that thing where like you're applying for the job and they want you to have already done that job before they give you the job? So that's not how it works with organizing, right? We're all showing up as individuals with the skills, experiences, perspectives, knowledge that we have, and coming together, working together to do something with it. So for us, from the Tech Workers group, there were some skills that we had. We have people who were experienced with coding, they're able to help like build a website. I work in finance, and so I can do some data analysis. Someone else has graphic design background, so they're creating like social media stuff. And then for the skills that we don't have, we learn from others. We reach out to other organizers, people who have done this work, people who are doing this work, and we grow from there. And it can feel really small, and it did feel really small what we were doing, right? We're in this one city, we're trying to get them to take down some cameras. But it starts to come together, right? Because this is happening in one city in the Bay Area, and then you see it's happening in cities all over the Bay Area. And now it's happening in cities all over the country. And we're starting to see these small grassroots campaigns of people working together, people who mostly are not being paid to do this. But they're showing up and doing the work because they care about their communities and because they care about the safety of their communities. And we're at the point now where, I want to show this. So this was like a year ago. If you Google Flock Safety, these are the headlines that are coming up, right? This is not some small startup we're talking about. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. They came out of Y Combinator. If you Google Flock Safety today, these are the headlines that come up. And so literally through just ordinary people coming together, we've been able to challenge this startup with hundreds of millions of dollars in funding, people like Peter Thiel standing behind it. And they're struggling. They're on the back foot. And so this is what happens. Just by showing up, by doing the work, this is what we can accomplish. What I talked about just now, it can feel different from maybe what you're used to when you think about showing up for Palestine. This is different from something like a protest, right? And I'm sure a lot of us have been going to protests over the past few years, and protests are important, they have their place. They serve a purpose to show mass support for a cause, to increase awareness for people who might not be aware of what's going on. But there is a limit to what protests can accomplish. And I think we saw that really clearly with Palestine, right? Where we saw like the largest protests in history, mass mobilizations of millions of people around the world. And it didn't stop or even really slow down the genocide. And so this is some of the drawbacks of protests. What we have on this slide is mobilizing. So these are these short-term actions like protests, things that come together quickly, are often reactive, but you're reacting to the issue rather than trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. They bring together a lot of people, but it's temporary, right? You go to a protest, you have a lot of energy, you feel like you're part of something, and then you go home and you go about your day. And so when we think about real change, it has to be long-term. We have to have this long-term focus. And so our goal is to move people from mobilizing to organizing. And organizing is about building for the long term, and it takes work, it takes commitment. You are going to show up week after week, you're doing the work, you're meeting people, you're building relationships, you're building trust, you're building skills, you're building understanding. And through that, we're able to create a sustainable movement. And that's fair, right? A protest is temporary, but supporting Palestine is not. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that we carry with us every day, right? And so the grief, the anger, the frustration, the heartbreak, all of those things that we're feeling, we take it and we turn it into something lasting by organizing. So we've talked about what our strategy is, which is divestiture. We've talked about how we enact that strategy through organizing. Now I want to talk about why us. And by us, I really do mean like the people sitting in this room right now, like Muslims, workers, professionals in the Bay Area. Can I get a show of hands? How many people here work in tech? Okay, keep your hands up. How many people here don't work in tech but like live near tech company? Keep your hands up. Okay, it's basically everyone, right? So my point is, the tech industry is ubiquitous and part of us in the Bay Area. If you don't work at a tech company, you work near a tech company, you interact with a tech company, it's throughout our lives. And they play a really big role when it comes to what's happening in Palestine. The tech industry's involvement with surveillance, militarism, and warfare has increased significantly over the past few decades. You can see that here. This chart is just showing these few companies. It's certainly not limited to this, right? And I also want to point out that this is an older graph. This hasn't been updated for like the huge increase that we've been seeing over the past few years, specifically with Palestine, as well as ICE. Warfare today looks different than it did before. So rather than building bombs like a company like Lockheed Martin or Boeing is doing, tech companies are using AI to automate warfare. They're powering ICE detention centers. They're using censorship and surveillance. They're partnering with police departments. They're partnering with ICE. The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense have collectively spent, at least that we know of, $44 billion on services from these companies, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Twitter. So again, we're just talking about these guys. With that same amount of money, they could have provided food and nutrition aid to the entire population of Afghanistan 15 times. They could have ensured access to shelter, healthcare, food, and water to the entire population of Iraq 26 times. We could have distributed over 100 billion pounds of food to people suffering from starvation in places like Yemen and Sudan. We've seen tech's involvement in the genocide over the past few years. Workers from companies like Google and Microsoft have exposed how their employers are providing technology to Israel that is being directly used to harm and kill Palestinians. We see that with things through Project Nimbus, which Google and Amazon workers through No Tech for Apartheid have been pushing back against. We see this through Microsoft and OpenAI using their services to select targets for who to bomb. Companies like Palantir and all of these companies are not just operating in Gaza. We see their impact on the war in Gaza, and we saw it at Iran a couple weeks ago. And we're seeing it at home. These weapons are tested on Muslims in Palestine, in Iran, now in Lebanon, and then they're brought back here and used to surveil us, they're used against protesters, and they're used for mass deportation. I have this list here of companies, you guys might have seen this over the past few weeks, that Iran had named as potential targets during the war. And I share this because Iran is telling us that we see these companies as so complicit with war, with genocide, with American imperialism, that we think they are legitimate targets in war. In the same way that they were bombing American air and army bases, they said it's legitimate for us to bomb Google or Intel or Cisco. This is the level of involvement these tech companies have in warfare, and it's the way that the world sees us when we work at these companies. And so I want us to keep that in mind as we go through this next part. All of the stuff I shared, this is validated by the media movement. So this is a chart that I'm sure you guys have seen before. These are the targets, official targets of the media movement. And you can see we have a lot of tech companies here. Again, we're focusing on divestment. And so I specifically want you guys to look at this category here, pressure targets of the BDS movement. This is almost exclusively tech companies, right? And what that means is these companies are so large, you basically can't boycott Google, right? How are you going to live without Google? Even if you divest in your personal life from all of those things, if you go to work and they give you a Gmail, what are you going to do? And so the way that we put pressure on these companies, it has to look different. We have to be a little bit creative. And we, those of us in the Bay Area, those of us here in this room, are uniquely positioned to be able to do that because we live here, because we live next to the headquarters of these companies. You can walk onto Google's campus right now and stage a demonstration. And people have done that. We have massive conferences in the Bay Area, things like Dreamforce, things like Microsoft Ignite, where a group of Microsoft workers last year showed up and staged a disruption. A few months ago, we had GDC, the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, where a few of us were handing out flyers about Microsoft's complicity with the genocide, their contracts with ICE, encouraging people to learn more about Microsoft and the Xbox boycott. So these are tangible things that we can do here in a way that other people just can't. And if you're a tech worker, you can do that even more, right? You have more access, you have more knowledge, you have more leverage. And so I really mean it when I say this. There's no group of people in the world more better placed right now to be able to do this work. But at the end of the day, we don't just do things because they're strategic. We take action because we're Muslim. And as Muslims, real material struggle is necessary in order to seek Allah. As human beings, we have our fitra, right? We have our natural predisposition that inclines towards Allah. Allah is one, Allah is perfectly just. And so when we see oppression, when we exist in these systems of extreme inequality, we feel that discomfort, even if we're not the ones suffering from it. Because it's in contradiction to who Allah is, who we know Him to be. And so yes, we have to take action to help Palestine, to help our brothers and sisters here in our backyard and around the world. But also, we take action to help ourselves, to preserve our fitra, to preserve our closeness to Allah. In the Quran, Allah tells us that that's what He prefers. Those believers who stay at home, except those with valid excuses, are not equal to those who strive, the mujahideen, who strive for the cause of Allah with their wealth and with their lives. We have this hadith here, narrated by Abu Dhar, who said, I asked the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, which action is best? He replied, Iman in Allah and jihad in the way of Allah. Two things. First, Iman, next is jihad. That's the level of importance that jihad, that struggle, plays in Islam. Think about it. Allah, in His perfect plan, placed you here, in this time, in this place, in this moment in history. And so why are you here? It can't just be to make money, right? It can't be to live in comfort when people are suffering so greatly. And so instead of ignoring, instead of numbing ourselves, or believing that there's no point because there's nothing we can do about it, we struggle. We can see that we're in the right place, at the right time, with the right values, guided by our faith, to be able to make real change. We choose to be the mujahideen who strive in the cause of Allah. Our actions are not tied to the outcome, they're tied to our iman. And if nothing I've said so far has convinced you, I want to finish with this. This is a statement from workers in Gaza. This is a direct appeal from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions in the Gaza Strip. And they say, to all free workers everywhere, we think well of you, so roll up your sleeves to break the siege on Gaza. We await from you a human and moral role to save Gaza. Honorable colleagues, you are the most worthy of carrying this responsibility. So be our support, move the streets, and stop the arms deals that are killing children, women, and workers. The working class can defeat these criminal policies if they unite their ranks and raise their voice against colonialism, Zionism, and the savagery of capitalism. There is no excuse for those who abandon Gaza and its people, or who abandon the workers. Gaza will remain a witness to those who stood with the cry of humanity, and it will remain a symbol for the free people of the world. And so when we talk about us as workers, this is not theoretical. This is what the workers of Gaza are asking us to do. So at the very least, if you don't buy the strategy, if you don't think it's going to work, you show up because if you care about Gaza, this is what they're telling you to do. So we've talked through our strategy. We know how to enact the strategy. We've talked about why we are the right people to do this work. Finally, how do we actually do it? I'm going to talk through a couple of case studies. I'll try to go quickly in case you want time for questions. This case study is actually from the 1970s. So this was during South African apartheid at Polaroid, which we don't really think about right now, but it is a tech company, and at the time it was like a big tech company. And so in 1970, a group of Polaroid workers launched a divestment campaign against their old employer, leading to the first anti-apartheid boycott of a US corporation. How this started was two Black employees were at work, and they saw this internal product mock-up of an ID for the South African Department of Mines. And Polaroid at the time was thought of as kind of like how we think of like a Google or a Meta being this very like progressive place, right? Polaroid employed a lot of African American employees, a lot of women. It was seen as this progressive kind of DEI space. And so they were really shocked by this. And as they looked into it, they realized Polaroid is actually selling photo equipment to the South African government, who's been using that photo equipment to create these IDs that they would use to enforce segregation. And so they decided we have to do something about this. Some of the tactics they used was trying to build a strong base internally. And in order to do that, they needed to educate their workers, because people didn't know what was going on. And you have to explain to them, like, no, Polaroid is doing this, and they might present themselves as this good, progressive place to work, but they're doing this at the same time. They're profiting from segregation and apartheid. They then started to disrupt company events. They named specific executives that were responsible for the stuff that was happening. And when that stuff didn't work, it eventually escalated into a worker-led protest at Polaroid headquarters. Eventually, Polaroid became the first big American company to withdraw from South Africa. And it was the first of many to come. And so we see here the power of the worker movement that started with two people who said, hey, this isn't okay. And by doing the work, by building, and by putting pressure on their employer, they were able to achieve this huge outcome. And so we see this really amazing example of what a win can look like. We also see that it took a long time, right? It started in 1970. In 1977, by the time we got to the outcome, those employees had left Polaroid. But the work that they were doing remained. Others were able to build off of it, and they didn't let up on the pressure. A more recent example is the Intel shareholder resolution. So this story might feel familiar to folks. I know as I've talked to people that this has kind of happened at a lot of tech companies where October 7th happens, and you're dealing with your own grief, loss, kind of hopelessness, and then you get an email from your leadership that is so Zionist and awful, and you're like, what is going on? Like, I thought this was a good place to work. I thought I was going to be here for a long time. They're so supportive of us. They give us all this funding for Muslim events. Like, what is going on? And basically, that's what happened at Intel. It was right after October 7th, employees started to receive one-sided, very openly sized communications and actions by leadership. And when employees started to, in good faith, try to engage with leadership on this, explain why it was harmful, explain why it was incorrect, explain how they were feeling as Muslims, as Palestinians, as Arabs, as people who care about humanity, that they were ignored and eventually silenced. As this is happening, despite Intel's supposed code of conduct, global human rights principles, they announced in December 2023 that they were going to invest $25 billion in a new plant in Israel. And so employees tried to push back, and they used all the channels that tech companies tell us that we should use. They wrote emails to leadership, they tried to set up meetings with them, they used the ERGs, they had listening sessions, they asked questions in Q&A that would magically disappear from the list. Eventually, they wrote an open letter to company leadership with specific asks that was ignored. And at the end, they were told, you can't talk about Palestine on company channels anymore. And so, We had to consider external means of pressure after exhausting all of the internal options that we had. The way we did that is by learning from existing organizations and other movements to figure out how we come up with a strategy. So current and former workers, investors, tech workers have all come together to file this shareholder resolution demanding an ethical investigation into Intel's involvement with Israel. This is a creative way where former workers said, okay, even if we don't work there anymore, or we can't use our internal channels, what else can we do? What else is available to us? So again, when this group started, it wasn't like, okay, we're going to do a shareholder resolution. It was like, okay, we have to do something. And you show up week after week and you have these conversations and you learn and you ask questions, you do research, you meet with people. And eventually you get to the point where you come up with tactics and strategy. And again, this is a long-term strategy. So this resolution, we know it's not going to pass. There's no way it's going to pass, right? Intel's not going to let that happen because they own so many of the shares. The point is, we get enough votes this year that we can bring it back to vote again next year. And next year we get more votes and we have more time to build people's awareness of what's Intel's involvement with Israel, Intel's involvement with things like ICE. And so we do that again the next year. We get enough votes that we can bring it back a third year. And we keep doing this over and over again, not until the resolution passes, until there's enough votes that they can't ignore us anymore. And so when we think about like goals and strategy, it doesn't look like the things that we're taught as success or achievement. Again, it's about showing up, it's about doing the work, it's about building momentum towards something bigger. Oh, okay. I thought I had 5 more minutes. Okay, I'm gonna then really quickly come to this. This is a list of organizations that you can get involved with that already exist. You don't have to start this work from scratch. I'm gonna share a form later so you can like find all of the information, but there are some folks here who are part of these boards, so if you can just raise your hand, so like Noah, who can they come talk to? This brother. If you work at Microsoft or associated companies, no tech for apartheid. This sister over here, so if you work at Google or Amazon or any of their subsidiaries, I'm Paige, this is the semiconductor workers, come talk to me. No Games for Genocide, also, if you work in video games, come talk to me. Tech Workers Coalition is more broad, any tech workers. Bridge to Humanity is Cisco workers, I don't know if there's anybody here. Is there anyone from healthcare workers? No, okay, I can get you in touch with someone. And then Bay Area Labor for Palestine is just labor in general. So you don't have to be a tech worker, you just have to be a person. Is there someone here from Hero 10 who wants to make, do you want to come get the mic?
We actually have to make it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you guys. Sorry to cut us off. I'm sure you guys all know the advocacy curfew. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. It's exactly what I needed to know that sometimes the fight feels slow, but that's how it runs, and that doesn't mean that it's over. So we won't have time for questions after Salah is in 2 minutes. So I just have a couple of quick announcements. Please make sure you leave promptly after Isha. Our vendors are closing up, so you have maybe a minute or two to grab something quickly. We have our Salah picnic this Sunday at 1 p.m. at Cameron Park. So please RSVP so we can have an accurate head count, and feel free to bring some snacks if it suits you. And we'll take down Kiran's number here if you guys have, or her email if you guys have any questions. And scan that to stay connected. Thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Can I just quickly explain what this is?
So that's in 2 minutes.
Okay, so this form right here, if you scan it, anything that we just talked about, like scan it, fill it in, sorry. And I'll connect you to the right people and the right organizations. Again, the point of this is we want to move towards action, so whatever that looks like, but these organizations are already doing work and they need people, and you guys are people who care about Palestine. So scan the form, there are a lot of different ways to get involved. I also want to share this really important call to action that is happening tomorrow.
Assalamu alaikum. So essentially, there is a unhoused encampment right across from Happy Hollow, and they are starting to get swept, which means that the police basically go through and take all their things. It is starting tomorrow. What we do is we basically provide 3 services. We have legal observance. It is illegal to take away all of these people's accumulated wealth, right? Like they have nothing, and the police go through and they take the only property that they own. And then we do legal observance, we pass out mutual aid, so water, food, supplies, and then the final thing that we do is we film interactions with the cops. So if you can either donate your time from 8 to 2 p.m. it will be happening every day for the next 3 weeks, so even if you don't have capacity this week, inshallah in the near future, they're in 3-hour shifts just in case you want to do it right before work. And then also, if you know a nonprofit that can supply meals, we are trying to get lunch to them every day because they are in a very high stress situation and tend not to eat as they move and the cops are there. So if you could do either of those things, please join that WhatsApp group chat, tinyurl.com/muslimhouse, and we greatly appreciate any aid. Thank you.